This week's Tales from the Territories focused on Portland wrestling. More specifically, Don Owen's Pacific Northwest Wrestling, which remains the longest-running professional wrestling promotion ever in this country, and second in the world only to CMLL in Mexico. So to give you some background not covered here in the episode, Portland Wrestling first debuted in 1954. They debuted on KPTV, which was Portland's very first TV station. And they stayed on the air for almost 40 years. I wonder if the viewers had to listen to the announcer every week talk about how they were the longest-running episodic television anywhere in the country. Probably not. Don Owen never paid for television, and he never signed a contract with the station to air the show, which is pretty amazing given that the show went on uninterrupted for, I think, 38 years. Don Owen was regarded as one of the few honorable promoters in a business that is just filled with con men and scumbags. After Owen passed away, Dory Funk Jr. told Slam Wrestling that Don Owen was the best payoff promoter in the business. He paid the boys what he said he would, right down to the penny. And he was just as nice of a guy. You know, if somebody got hurt on the job, these days WWE pays for it, no questions asked. It's sort of expected, as they should. They have plenty of money to do so. In the territory days, those promoters were not making the kind of money that WWE and AEW were making today. And there was a story where Tim Flowers got his head busted open on the ring post one night and he needed $10,000 worth of plastic surgery. Don Owen paid the bill. No questions asked. So lots of big names got their start working in Portland, the biggest name being Rowdy Roddy Piper. But there were others, Buddy Rose, Dynamite Kid, Kurt Hennig, Adrian Adonis, Buzz Sawyer, Sergeant Slaughter, Jesse Ventura, Jimmy Snuka wrestled there, Andre the Giant worked in the territory, as did Ric Flair, a lot of people. For a territory that had a main roster that was relatively small, they did get a lot of big names to pass through. So for the round table, they had the Grappler, Len Denton, Princess Victoria, who did not work there more than a few weeks, Bushwhacker Luke, and Mike Masters, who I thought was the best of all the talking heads on this special. And I was very sad when at the very end of the episode they flashed a message that he had passed away in August. He died from throat cancer. And he was 68 years old. Didn't look it on this episode. He looked damn good for 68. So it sucks that he died before the episode aired. WWE fans would obviously know Luke and Butch as a kids act. They were basically a cartoon in the early 90s. They were working for Vince McMahon, but it's the run that they're most remembered for because Vince McMahon is the one who had national television. He had international television. So they went to Vince and they made their money, but any footage of the Sheepherders from before their time in WWE shows a very different team than the one that, I saw on television, for example, as a kid. They were violent. They were bloody. The polar opposite of the Bushwhackers. And Luke even said at the end of the episode, they went to WWE for one reason. The money. He said in the NWA, you were a wrestler. In WWE, you were a celebrity. The Sheepherders were scary dudes, but, how can you fault the two of them for making more money for an easier job after years of working hardcore matches and scarring up their bodies? So Luke put over Don Owen for being ahead of the curve with how he made every show appear packed, even if it wasn't. The bleachers in the arena were on wheels. And so if they didn't sell enough tickets on a given night, they would just take that section out. They would roll the remaining sections together in such a way that made it look like it was packed. So even when they were not sold out, they were always sold out because that's how it looked on TV. I used to give Impact a lot of credit for that. When they finally went out on the road about 10 years ago, they got out of Florida and they took the show on the road, which didn't last very long. But they had a knack for making even the smallest crowds look much bigger on TV than they really were. And loud, too. But of course, no Territories episode would be complete without one disgusting story involving shitting, pissing, vomiting, or in this case, taking someone's cigar and sticking it up your asshole. That's what happened to Elton Owen. Elton Owen was the brother of Don Owen, who would be in charge at some of the spot shows that they did. So, Don Owen was the promoter. And typically he was there, but when they would run these towns that were sort of on the outskirts, those were the spot shows, he would have his brother, oversee things. He would let his brother be backstage and kind of oversee everything on a given night. Well, Luke said that Elton would be drunk every night. He was always smoking a cigar. And so he would leave the cigar to go up to his office, and Adrian Adonis would grab the cigar and would stick the non-lit end of it up his rear end. I mean, I would hope it was they didn't actually say it, but I would hope it was the non-lit end. Otherwise, he would be in for a very painful surprise. But he would put the cigar back. And when Elton would come back, he would put the cigar right back in his mouth. And then he would wonder, why does it smell like someone took a shit in here? Before finally realizing the cigar was up somebody's ass, and now it is on his lips. So there was another story where Elton always carried a gun on him because the box office was all cash, and he didn't want to get caught one night with all that money on him and get robbed. The problem is he was a drunk. And so one night he got so drunk he accidentally shot himself in the balls. I mean, right through the testicles. And the doctor thought maybe he tried to kill himself, and Elton explained to him, he goes, "Doc, if I wanted to off myself, I wouldn't have shot myself in the balls." I would concur. If that thought ever crossed my mind, and hopefully it never does, but if that thought ever crossed my mind, I could think of far less painful ways to go than shooting myself in the balls. So they talked about Playboy Buddy Rose, who's a very central figure in this territory. And as I go on here, it'll become very clear why. Even at the end of the territory, he became somebody who, without him, there's a lot of that Portland wrestling footage that would have been lost to time. But they talked about Buddy, and he was one of the territory's biggest heels. And growing up, watching WWF in the Northeast, I watched the Playboy Buddy Rose blow-away diet skit on WWE television. He was good for some comedy, but in Portland, he knew how to get heat. Like, I didn't look at him as anything serious in WWE. He was just a guy. He's a big guy, who they made fun of him for being fat. They used him for comedy relief. And that's how I knew Buddy Rose when I was growing up as a wrestling fan. But the matches that he and Doug Summers had against Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, those were classic back in the AWA. But that came years later. In Portland, it was the rivalry with Buddy Rose and Matt Borne, who would go on to become Doink the Clown, the best Doink the Clown, evil Doink, Matt Borne. Buddy started dating Matt's sister and married her in real life. Not long after this, there were rumors that Buddy was cheating on her with his longtime girlfriend, Tammy. This did not sit very well with Matt Borne. So one night, Matt went to Buddy's house, he busted down the door, and he beat the shit out of him. And Buddy pressed charges, had him arrested. Borne spent, I think, a couple of nights in jail. Even after he got out of jail, his first night back at the arena, he went right for Buddy. And the only reason he didn't kill him is because Matt's father, Tony, who was also a wrestler, Tony Borne, he held him back. Mike Masters said that at first he wasn't sure if the wedding was a work or not, because he knew Buddy liked to get heat. So for all he knew, maybe the whole thing was just a put on. But one night when Buddy was in the car with him, they were driving home, and Buddy offered him $50 if Masters would drive home with him and would go into his house first, just to check and make sure that Matt Borne wasn't there waiting for him. And Masters said that's when he knew the heat between them was very real. I mean, back in the territory days, a man parting with his money, he doesn't do that unless he is genuinely scared for his life. And he paid him. He paid him the $50, and Masters went and checked, and there was nobody there. Princess Victoria told the story of Buddy lobbying for her to take part in a battle royal with the men, with the idea that it would get him a ton of heat when he threw her out of the ring. And Buddy and another guy, I don't think they intended to hurt her, but basically the way they threw her out of the ring, they basically lawn darted this woman out of the ring and into a brick wall. And she slid down and she split her head open hard way. She's laying there in a puddle of blood. And what nobody knows is that she hasn't smartened up her family, who was in the crowd that night. She hasn't smartened up her family yet to the wrestling business, that the whole thing is a work. So her brother, who maybe at the time is 17 years old, not very big, he tries to jump Buddy Rose. He tries to get in the ring and go after Buddy. And Buddy has at least 100 pounds on this guy. But, he's going to defend his sister, not knowing that wrestling is a work. And she credited Buddy with making her as a babyface because of the heat that he got her on that night. It really, in her mind, did her career wonders. She ended up getting a run out of it working for WWE through Moolah, even though some of the boys, including Roddy Piper, warned her, do not work for Moolah. But she said it was a big opportunity for her, so she went. And they had great footage of Piper in this too, and Luke talking about a cage match that he and Butch had against Piper and Rick Martel once. There was a road story about Piper being pulled over by the cops smoking weed and then being taken to a judge's house at 2 o'clock in the morning. They had to pay a fine. After they left, they pissed all over the window outside the building because we can't have an episode without urination or defecation. I mean, you should know this by now. They talked about the downfall of the territory having to do with the commission getting involved with one of their new rules being no blood. And if somebody did bleed, the match would have to be immediately stopped. Now, this is a promotion, you got to remember. Like a lot of the territories that use blood all the time. AEW would have been a perfect territory back in the day. The mentality was red equals green. This is where the infamous Breakfast Club angle came from, which they covered here, with John Nord, who would go on to become the Berserker. He was tagging with the Grappler against a young Brian Adams, who would go on to become Crush. They couldn't use blood, but Nord had a way around that. He bought up like 10 gallons of milk and boxes of cereal from the supermarket, and they used that instead. And the Grappler thought he was nuts, but they got all of this stuff, and in the ring that night, I mean, they're hammering Adams with the gallon jugs, and the milk is splattering all over the people in the front row and splattering all over the mat. And Don Owen shooed them out after because now he's going to have to go clean the mat. So they were dubbed the Breakfast Club after that. Matt Borne, he bled in a match on TV. He tried to pass it off his hard way. Nobody believed him. And they got shut down for a week. And with the commission, breathing down their necks and watching their every move, and you have Vince McMahon expanding across the country, now he's expanding out west, the Grappler says that he knew the writing was on the wall for the company. Vince McMahon wanted the television in Portland. He was paying the station $3,500 a week when Don Owen wasn't paying them a dime. So it was an easy decision for the station manager to make. Who are you going to go with? These guys are willing to pay us $3,500 a week, and they have the biggest, most nationally recognized wrestling product right now in the country. Or we can just keep going with Portland, with Don Owen, who isn't paying us a cent. It's a pretty easy decision to make. But the reality is that by the early 90s, when Portland finally went down, there were very few territories left. Don Owen, Jerry Jarrett, they were two of the only ones left standing. The pressure from Vince McMahon did not help. But there were other issues which, they didn't even get into. Namely, the TV station moving them to a different time slot after midnight so that they can make room for paid programming in their old time slot. And then it wasn't long after that, the numbers started to dwindle. And that, coupled with how many hours of wrestling there was on basic cable every week, because there were more options than ever before, Portland wasn't the only thing people could watch now. And some of those names that got big in Portland were now even bigger stars working either in WWE or WCW. Those things really just kind of conspired together to lead to the downfall of the promotion. The television show was their best advertisement for selling tickets to live shows. Very much the way that Memphis worked. It was every Monday at the Mid-South Coliseum. There was a big show. Jerry Lawler against this guy, Jerry Lawler against that guy. So they had Memphis TV, but the TV was there to promote the show on Monday and the live events to sell tickets, because that was the lifeblood of the business. Wrestling now is very different. It's less so about selling tickets, and if you can get that guaranteed TV money like WWE has a guaranteed $50 million for every Saudi Arabia show. Selling tickets is still important, but it's not nearly as important as it was 30 years ago. But back then, that was the lifeblood of every company. You don't sell tickets, you don't make money. It's very simple. And if fewer people are watching the TV show, that means that fewer people are buying tickets. And if fewer people are buying tickets, you're going to have a dead territory. Now, one last thing they mentioned, and this is the part that I found really interesting. You often hear about a lot of territories in the 70s and even in the 80s using the same master tapes over and over again to save on money. So a lot of their old shows were taped over because they just kept using the same tapes. And all that footage is gone. It's lost forever. It was the same with Portland. But Buddy Rose taped every single show from his time in Portland so that he could watch his matches back and critique them. So I did a little digging. Buddy was friends with a man named Rich Patterson. Rich Patterson was a Portland wrestling fan from the time that he was a kid, and he is a Portland wrestling historian today. In 1996, Buddy told him that he had all these tapes in his garage that he couldn't play anymore because he didn't have a machine. And they're taking up too much space, so I'm just going to throw them away unless you want them. So Patterson took the tapes. And a lot of them were unmarked, so he wasn't even sure what was on them. But they were in a format that predated Beta and VHS, called the Quasar Great Time Machine. I never even knew this, and I started reading up on this the other day. It's this format called the Quasar Great Time Machine. It came out right before Betamax. They stopped making the machines after 1978. It took them 2 years to even find a machine and then get it fixed. There were about 40 of those tapes in his collection. They had collected dust and molds. He had to clean that out. In those tapes, he found the only known Portland footage of Jimmy Snuka and Jesse Ventura. But he was able to restore the footage of the Roddy Piper-Buddy Rose feud. In all, he got 26 hours of Portland footage from 1977 to 1979 out of those tapes. The 900 or so VHS tapes that he got from Buddy's widow after he passed away, she was going to junk them. She said, I'm either going to throw them away or I'm going to donate them to Goodwill. And so, of course, Patterson said, I'll take them. And that had about 275 hours of Portland footage from 1980 all the way through 1991. So, all told, he has over 300 hours of Portland TV, and you can find those episodes on YouTube right now. All thanks to Buddy Rose. Were it not for him wanting to critique his own matches, they would have been lost forever. So I really like this episode. I liked it a lot more than I did the Stampede one from a couple of weeks ago. This Tuesday, it is World Class out of Dallas. That's the Von Erichs. And we still have Jim Crockett Promotions in Mid-South to round out the season. I thought there was only one episode left. I thought World Class was the last one for some reason. Meanwhile, I forgot the two biggest episodes, probably the two of the biggest territories. So we actually have 3 episodes left.